In this module, we've been looking geographically at the issue of poverty. In order to do this, we've been mainly identifying what is happening where, or in other words, where is there poverty? How do we recognize it? What patterns do we see? We looked at maps that showed us where poverty exists in the world, and we created scatter plots so we could see the patterns that exist as social indicators like fertility rate, infant mortality, and literacy rate can be predicted based on GNI per capita or overall wealth of a country. To continue examining this question from a geographic perspective, we need to ask, why do some countries go through development and others remain the least developed? We have identified where the core countries are located in the United States, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, and Argentina. What caused them to develop to be the most developed countries in the world? Why do some formerly periphery countries like Brazil, Russia, India, and China become semi periphery countries, meaning they're going through rapid development and may even become core countries in our lifetime? Why do some countries remain the least developed countries in the world, as if they are stuck? Today, we're going to seek some answers to this question. First, let's look at a few new terms that will help us describe economies more accurately as geographers. Remember that the economic lens looks at the way people get what they need and want. Well, all places in the world from the beginning of human history began with a subsistence level economy in which people make and create what they need and want. Has anyone ever been to a pioneer exhibit in a museum, visited Jamestown, Williamsburg, read books about pioneer life, maybe played Minecraft? In these olden day models, as we like to refer to them, people sewed their own clothes made from the cotton they grew or the wool they sheared from their own animals. They grew their own food or farmed and forged their own tools. Then they traded with others as needed when possible. But pretty much everything was made by humans who developed the skills to provide the things that they needed and wanted. Again, we refer to this type of economy as a subsistence economy. Over time, because of wars, international trade agreements, population growth, and the need for more food than a place could create on its own, humans innovated and came up with new technologies that allowed more people to be fed and more things to be created by fewer people. This first occurred in England in the 1700s when kings and queens were competing with other foreign countries to have the wealthiest economy. They sent their ships to explore places that had raw materials, which could be converted into machinery. Then they would manufacture products in their own factories. Then they would ship them out to places that depended on these items, like weapons and tools, processed food items like flour, and textiles or fabrics. When a country industrializes, it begins to develop pretty rapidly. Let's take a quick look at how industrialization happened and how England and the United States went through the process to becoming developed and industrialized. You may remember learning about the Industrial Revolution, which began in England in the 1700s. As you watch this video, think about the rapid changes that occurred due to innovative technology and invention. What happens after industrialization? Life expectancy goes up fast, but fertility rate still remains high. This leads to a population explosion and a need for increased healthcare and education. Once fertility rate stabilizes, a country can develop even more and become post industrial. Post industrial no longer needs manufacturing and factories, and now most of the jobs become service type jobs. Service jobs are jobs like information technology, operating a business, designing graphics, along with other services like healthcare, work, and education. Anyone who works in a job where they are not making things in a factory or growing food to sell likely provides a service and is a service worker. The places that are now post industrial and went through industrialization did so at the earliest. So we're talking about the United States, Western Europe, Japan, and Australia. As a result, these are the core countries that have the highest level of development. As you can see from the images here, as countries become industrialized, their standard of living begins to go up. The countries who have evolved past industrialization to create innovations and rely on other less developed countries for manufacturing have the highest level of development. This map, yes, it is a map, is a cartogram showing which countries contribute to the overall population in the world. It is a cartogram as it doesn't literally represent the size, shape, and locations of these places. Instead, it uses scale and color to show a comparison of the economies. The countries that are the largest in size produce the most wealth in the world. You can see that the United States produces almost 3 times what the rest of the world produces combined. The colors are different based on the region. They are varied in shade based on the sector of the economy. So you can see that the United States has a mostly service based economy and a very small industrial and agriculture economy, which it didn't used to have. Japan, Germany, and other European countries are similar, and Brazil, which was formerly a periphery country, has emerged as one of the larger contributors to global wealth and is mostly a service economy. The demographic transition model is what you're looking at now. This is what geographers use to explain how all of this happens. The purple curve is the birth rate, a similar indicator to fertility rate. The green curve represents the death rate. The red curve represents growth in population. The y-axis represents birth and death per thousands of years. The x-axis represents time. In the high stationary period, In the high stationary period, countries are at the lowest level of development. They have a high birth rate and a high death rate. The population is low. In the United States and Western Europe, we would say that we were at this stage prior to the late 19th century. In the early expanding period, a country begins to go through an agricultural and industrial revolution. So more food is available. You can see that the population begins to go up and people begin to live longer. However, the birth rate is still high as a result of few educational opportunities, cultural expectations to have children, gender expectations of women, and lack of available health care. This happened in the United States from the late 1800s until the middle of the 20th century. In the late expanding period, a country has industrialized and healthcare and education is beginning to catch up with the population growth. There's more access to the social services needed, but the population is still expanding. This began to happen in the last half of the 20th century in the United States. Finally, a country becomes stable in its population and it's able to sustain them as it becomes a service based, post industrialized economy. Manufacturing here has reached a point at which either a country relies on less developed countries to manufacture and produce goods than imports them, or they've developed the innovation to require even fewer industrialized jobs. This is where the United States is currently. So, why do some countries stay in the earlier stages? Why don't they industrialize? And why do some countries go through some industrialization but can't overcome some of the social issues like health and education in order to truly become developed and get to the late stationary stage where they can be post industrialized and service based? Well, we will explore global trade reasons why this happens in next week's lesson. But for today, let's look at the countries that have traditionally been colonized by stronger, more powerful countries. You may remember learning in your social studies classes before about colonization and what it means. It generally means that one country uses the resources of another country for its own economic gain. This map shows how some countries of the world, until recently, were imperialized or colonized in order to make use of their human labor through slavery, their raw materials through mining, or their farmland for food production. Also, we refer to that often as plantations. The countries that you see in gray are the ones that imperialized or colonized the countries below in yellow and green. In other words, the entire social, economic, and political system from the late 1800s, when industrialization began, until the end of the 20th century was based on the powerful countries exploiting the less powerful countries who were not given the opportunity to go through their own industrialization. They were then forced to trade with the great countries. Even after they achieved their independence, they were still forced into trade deals with the great countries because they needed loans for development and partners with whom to trade. You will read later in this playlist more details about how this happened. But in a nutshell, some countries have been and continue to be exploited, while other countries benefit economically from their resources, raw materials, and human labor. This makes it very difficult for those green countries to come out of poverty.